Hello, everybody. I hope you're all doing well today. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the State of Developmental Relationships webinar. We'll probably see more and more people come in as we are now at 1 o'clock our time in Central Time. We are very excited to have you. This is one of our favorite things that we do is to host you, to bring people together. We love people sharing things within the chat feature of Zoom. I am Ben Holtberg. I'm the CEO and president of Search Institute. I'm also here with Dr. Joanna Williams, who's our Senior Director of Research, who's going to unpack some of the data for us. And we have two very special guests. One is coming from Good Samaritan Community Services, Patrice Owens, which is in San Antonio, Texas. And another is our principal, Jeff Cavett, who is coming from Skyview Middle School right here in the Twin Cities where we are, where I am coming from. As we get started, please feel free as questions come up to put those in the Q&A section of the Zoom there, and also use that chat feature. And just so you all know, this is being recorded. We will share this with everybody who registered for the event. So to start off, I would love to have you tell us where are you joining us today? What part of the world or the country? And the name of your youth serving organization or school or the sector that you're in. So would love to just see that chat populate with all of the different people that we have today. And it looks like we have people from all over the place, from Las Vegas. I think I saw Denmark in there, from Kansas, Vermont, Cornell, Davis. So you can see this where everybody's coming from all parts of the world. One of the things that I think is so amazing about the work that we get to do every day is that we get to partner with you all. And you all are doing this work on the ground every day. And just to see you show up today gives hope around the idea that we cannot each individually be all things to all kids at all times, but as a community we can. As we come around shared purpose and recognize in this moment, at this time, how do we come together to impact the precious young people that are in our communities? And not only is it critical for us to do that for them, but also it makes us better. And that is the mission of Search Institute. Search has been really doing this work for over 60 years, and was one of the catalysts of the positive youth development movement that is still core to our DNA. And if you're not familiar with what the positive youth development movement was, is it really was a beautiful movement of researchers and practitioners and policymakers and funders and communities that were tired of the status quo of how young people were being talked about, as if they were problems to be solved, and their strengths and all the things that they brought to the table were often really hidden in the narratives of deficits. And the movement really challenged this idea to move towards a strength-based approach that we believe at the heart of who we are at Search Institute, that each and every young person has inherent value. And that when that inherent value is first recognized and then nurtured and activated, then communities and the young people themselves thrive together. This is thriving. It is the mutual beneficial cycle of impact that happens within communities when we are intentional about being able to identify those strengths that are already there and wrap those, really create the infrastructure within these ecosystems for relationships, and also for those relationships to really create the access to resources and opportunity. And this is why we exist. We exist to support you. We cannot reach our mission if you are not reaching your mission. And we are so grateful that you are taking the time to be with us today. One of the core aspects of our work that is so critical to what we're doing today is around relationships. And I am at the point in my career and in my life coming out of being a licensed marriage and family therapist and then moving into academia and doing research around the power of relationships and how it is not just a nice thing to have, but it really is a necessary component of not just surviving, but thriving. And that this beauty that comes when we are intentionally focused on relationships, that it can enhance almost everything that we're doing. I would bet my career on it now. And when we're talking about relationships, we have to really talk about what types of relationships are we referring to when we talk about young people. And over the last decade, Search Institute has really moved to understand what are those key elements within a developmental relationship, those things that are required and necessary to meet, not only meet the developmental needs of the young people that you serve and that you work with, but also provide the opportunity for them to grow and to have those strengths, internal assets, and character virtues begin to emerge in ways that allow it to be activated in your communities. The idea that every young person not only has inherent value, but they also have a spark, something that they're interested in, something that moves them. And all of you know when you work with young people what that spark feels like. When that kid walks into the room and you see it and it starts to come alive, oh, there's nothing better. There's nothing better than to sense that spark in young people, those intrinsic things that they care about, and begin to think about how do we create the developmental relationships and cultivate those so that those sparks can turn into a bright flame and really begin to spread and impact the world around them as a powerful light. But this takes intention, and we know it takes intention. Because the reality about relationships is it's not enough for us to just say we prioritize relationships or we think relationships are important. That there often is a gap between the intention of what we say is important and how it's lived out and expressed every day with the young people we serve. And this is where developmental relationships framework can come in as an action-oriented framework to help point to key and core elements that are necessary for young people to be able to have the foundations to be able to thrive. And study after study, whether we're talking about longitudinal studies or cross-sectional studies, we've seen this evidence of this. And Joanna's going to unpack what we're seeing and hearing right now. And then our guests will be able to talk about how it comes alive in their communities. And when we talk about developmental relationships, we're talking about the idea that there are different things that kids need from us. One of them from the very start and as the very foundation is to acknowledge that inherent value by showing them that they matter for how we express care, that we see you, we hear you, you matter in this space. But we also have to be willing to provide that support and walk alongside those young people and help them work through difficult things, not do it for them, but be right beside them as they go through and challenging events and things in their lives. It is often just the power of showing up, always. And then challenging them to grow. How can you help me be better? How can you help me understand what is my potential in the world and have the belief that I can contribute in a unique way? And also, what I think is really critical as someone who has studied relationships and studied within families and beyond families, we often hear about the two dimensions of warmth, which is often support and expressing care, and demandingness, which is often expectation and boundary and challenging growth. But it's important that we also move beyond those to think about how are we developing leadership opportunities of voice and choice and listening and respecting the expertise of the lived experience that young people bring as well, to be some of the authors of their own stories and the shapers of their environments. And this is where the shared power piece comes in. And then finally, it's not enough to just provide these things. We have to start thinking about how do we take this relationship and begin to expand the possibilities and access to resources and opportunities and the social capital that gives kids the opportunity to thrive. That a developmental relationship, as we think about cultivating with young people, is not just an add on, it's not just a nice to have. It is a necessary component. It is the very infrastructure that enhances everything that you do with young people. And by the way, it's what we all care about. It's why we do what we do. And we know this from multiple studies of seeing what does it enhance from character virtue and character strength to social emotional competencies to grades and attendance to almost everything that we can talk about. And the reason why this is so critical at this moment in time and why you hear the passion in my voice is that we are talking about a moment that, yes, positive youth development was really critical for the movement to a strengths-based approach. But today we need a reimagined positive youth development in this moment of time when young people are facing this disconnect and this polarization and this loneliness and mental health at a time where we are offloading a lot of our cognitive load and there's a lot of discussion about artificial intelligence and what that means, but we cannot offload the very thing that makes us human when it comes to relationships. What are we drawing young people towards? What types of relationships are we providing to them that is understandably the connection for what relationships can be so that they're not turning to artificial intelligence to replace quality, deep relationships, but instead using it in ways that enhances the things that AI can enhance. We have to provide the relational infrastructure for our young people, and it's more important today than ever before. So as we dive into the data, I want you to think about not just the data, I want you to think about the faces. We don't think of data as points or numbers, but as people and kids and young people. I want you to think about the ones in your community, the people around you. I want you to think about your context. And together, we can come together at this moment and at this time to create the necessary components for our young people to thrive, and we will be better because of it. So I'm going to bring on just an incredible colleague and friend, Dr. Joanna Williams. I'm so grateful that Dr. Williams is here at Search Institute, and I'm going to let her break down the data for you.
Thanks, Ben. Welcome again, everybody. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day or evening or morning to join us. We're so excited you're here. I want to appreciate you, Ben, for grounding us in the passion and deep importance of relationships, and also reminding us that although I'm going to be talking about survey data and we see some numbers, really there are human beings behind all of these numbers. So, the State of Developmental Relationships this year summarizes data from a diverse group of over 35,000 young people, as well as over 2,500 youth serving staff and educators who participated in our developmental relationships survey between August of 2024 and July of 2025. So, thank you to each of you who took time to complete a survey, thousands and thousands of you. We are appreciative to be able to bring some of those insights to everybody who's joined us today. So let me start with just some of the basics. So we've got here average scores on developmental relationships overall and by element. And you can see in the bar on the left the benchmarks for what we consider low, moderate, and strong scores. So on average, young people reported relatively high developmental relationship scores overall. The strong DR score cutoff is about 67. So at 65, this first bar, overall developmental relationship scores were moderately high. And youth also reported relatively high levels of each element. Average scores for experiences with expressing care, providing support, and sharing power were each near that threshold of being strong. Youth experiences were strongest in the domain of challenging growth. So they felt adults were kind of holding them to high expectations, and they were more moderate for expanding possibilities. I want to add a layer of context of time just by looking at patterns over the past 3 cycles of data that we've collected with similar numbers of youth and sort of, from across the nation. You can see here that the patterns for developmental relationship scores overall here on the left, as well as by element, have remained pretty consistent over the past 3 data collection years. Young people report that they're experiencing each element at moderately high levels, again, with the exception of expanding possibilities. So, in this element, on average, again, there's a lot of variability within these numbers, but youth are not having as many experiences that broaden their horizons or connect them with new people compared to some of the other relational actions. Ben talked about this already, and we do find very consistently year over year and across all the different kinds of data we have that when youth are experiencing stronger developmental relationships, they also report higher levels of social emotional competencies. So they're thinking more about the needs of others, they work well in teams, they recognize and reflect on their feelings and hold themselves accountable for their decisions and actions. Similarly, youth who experience strong developmental relationships also report higher levels of character strengths. So they say they're feeling more prepared to lead and to persevere, they respect and collaborate with others, and they think about how their own decisions will impact the future. The average developmental relationship scores are promising. Most young people are experiencing each element at moderately high levels. However, when we take a closer look, we see again these experiences are not universal. So we're talking about individuals behind the data. When we unpack it by low, moderate, and strong relationships, we see that about 49%, so just under half of the young people who took the survey, reported strong developmental relationships. This means that the other half are not experiencing them at that strong level. So for every student who feels strongly supported and connected, there's another who's not experiencing those relationships quite as powerfully as their peers. The patterns of low, moderate, and strong developmental relationships are different in schools and community-based youth programs. So as the graph on the left shows, less than half of youth experience strong developmental relationships in schools, while almost 3/4 experience strong developmental relationships in youth programs. Importantly, the graph here on the right shows there's momentum we can build on when it comes to cultivating strong DRs. As we see in our data, when students experience strong developmental relationships in their schools in particular, they also experience a more positive school climate. So when we start to think about the multiple settings and spaces where young people spend their time, this includes schools, it includes community-based programs, it includes other places in the community, it includes homes and so on. It really reminds us to focus on the larger ecosystem and to think a bit more deeply about how each space can play a role in fostering strong developmental relationships so that across the ecosystem, youth are experiencing all of these elements at high levels. We're fortunate today, as we'll get to in a few minutes, to have guest experts from a school perspective as well as a community-based program perspective, and we'll be able to reflect a little bit more on the role of context in building strong relational climates. Before we get to them, though, I want to talk about one other pattern that we see in our data. If you've come to a State of DRs webinar before or read a State of Developmental Relationships report, you may have heard us talking about what we call the perception gap. So we see consistently in our developmental relationships data that adults report engaging in relational actions, to challenge growth or to share power at a higher level compared to what youth say that they're actually experiencing. So we call this difference between youth and adult reports of the DR actions the perception gap. As you can see from these bars, it tends to be most pronounced for express care. Adults who took surveys say they're expressing care at high levels, but students say they're experiencing care at moderate levels. And it's very possible that this perception gap simply reflects differences in how young people and adults interpret and respond to the survey items. But we wanted to kind of look into this a little bit more. To explore this further, we've taken a closer look at perception gaps by comparing settings that have small gaps, medium gaps, and large gaps between youth and adult reports. And we find that it actually does make a difference. So what we see here is a fairly consistent pattern, and that is that in settings with smaller gaps between youth and adult developmental relationship scores, which is represented by the darkest blue bars on the left, youth are reporting in this first set of bars better social and emotional outcomes. They're also reporting that in settings with smaller perception gaps, they're more culturally responsive and have a more positive climate. So there is a correlation between the gap between youth and adult reports and how what students are experiencing in terms of outcomes as well as their perceptions of climate. Of course, when there's a smaller gap, it means that student and adult scores are more aligned. What we find when we sort of dig even further into the data is that when the gap is smaller, it's because students' developmental relationship scores are higher. So, in other words, the gap doesn't close because adult scores are coming down. Instead, adult scores remain high and look similar to adults in spaces with medium and large gaps. Instead, what's happening is that students in schools and programs where there are smaller perception gaps are experiencing elements of developmental relationships at higher levels. So, this suggests that there's something happening in these spaces that really supports the cultivation of strong youth adult relationships. There's one other pattern that I want to note. It's not depicted here on the graph, but it's connected to what's on the slide. Or it's not, the graph is not shown here. We find in our data that staff training in developmental relationships is also associated with smaller perception gaps. So in schools and youth programs where adults take time to learn about developmental relationships and how to implement them, the gap between their scores and student scores is significantly smaller. And again, that means student scores are coming up closer to where adults are. So, together, these patterns speak to the importance of something that Ben mentioned in his introduction, and that is intentionality. Strong relationships happen on purpose. Being intentional means we think and learn about how to build relationships before, during, and after our interactions with young people. Building strong developmental relationships on purpose also requires approaches that are inclusive and equitable. We actively cultivate curiosity about the diverse young people in our care and think about ways to extend our relationship building efforts to each and every young person. And we show up for them in a way that considers and responds to their experiences, preferences, and goals. So that is where I'm going to end the summary of the data, the kind of state of DR data. And with that overview in mind, I'm really excited to invite our two guest experts to join us. So they can share more about how they support the cultivation of strong developmental relationships in their work. I'm also going to invite Ben back on as he is going to help co-facilitate the conversation. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then I'm going to take a moment to introduce our guests a little bit more. So you heard from Ben early on that we joined today by Patrice Owens and Jeff Cavett. Patrice is here with us from San Antonio, Texas. She is the program coordinator for college and career readiness and youth case management at Good Samaritan Community Services. Patrice brings extensive experience working with special education students in various roles, and historically her work has centered on supporting young people's academic, social, and emotional development while advocating for equitable access to opportunities. She's been working for the past 7 years to serving youth and families through Good Samaritan. She has had various roles across her career and now oversees college and career readiness and youth case management, where she leads programming, she supports student success pathways, and works closely with families and community partners to ensure young people are prepared for life beyond high school. We are also joined by Jeff Cavett, who is joining us from Minnesota today. Jeff has worked in education for 20 years, serving as a high school English teacher, a district equity specialist, and a high school assistant principal. He is currently in his third year as principal of Skyview Middle School in Oakdale, Minnesota. Jeff lives in Oakdale with his wife and two children. I'm going to kick it off with our first question, and I'd love if you could each briefly share why developmental relationships are valuable in your settings. And Patrice, why don't you get us started?
Alrighty. I would say here at Good Sam, a lot of the work we do involves youth. So most of our clients are youth. So I feel like by us utilizing the framework, it allows us to be more impactful and intentional in our work. And if we weren't utilizing it, nothing we would do would actually matter because if you don't have the relationships with the students, there's no way that you can change their lives in a positive way. So it's very important in the work that we do for sure.
Thanks, Patrice. Jeff, how about you?
I think that it's always a struggle in working with the educators of middle level students to figure out how to combine our efforts to create relationships with our efforts to increase their achievement so that they feel prepared and confident to step into high school as ninth graders. They often feel like separate conversations. We're doing SEL work today, and we're doing content work and instructional work tomorrow. I think the developmental relationship framework really unites those two things. Often you can have teachers that feel like they've got a particular niche. I'm passionate about my content area, and that's how I show care for students. And other teachers are more, I develop relationships with students. They love to be around me and in my classroom. That's how I show that I care. But of course, we want a blend of those two things. We want the trust and the relationship, but we also want to leverage that to teach the students things to expand their possibilities. Our job is to get them ready for high school. And at Skyview, we've just found that framework so helpful in honoring both of those and showing how they can work together in every single classroom. At the middle level, you've got teachers that are huggers and teachers that are more formal than that, and they can both come together around this framework and use it to support their students and create those relationships.
Yeah, I love, I'm so glad we have a good amount of time to really just like dive into this with you all because I think people will find it very helpful to really get into the examples of what this looks like and feels like for you all. And one of the things that I think can come up for us sometimes is when we look at the five elements of the developmental relationships, and for some people within organizations, they might be like, oh, I'm good at these things. I can do expressing care. I can provide support. I can, they might say, well, these other things I'm not that they don't come natural to me, or I'm not that good. Talk a little bit about how you all have created the relational mindset within your organizations of like getting them to really buy in to the developmental relationships framework when you think about the kind of multidimensionality of that framework. And this time we'll start with you, Jeff, and then we'll go to Patrice.
I think one way that we got buy-in at Skyview is we had experienced what had been experienced across education, and I'm guessing in Patrice's setting also, coming out of COVID, of especially early adolescents really struggling to regulate themselves. Their mid-elementary years were spent online and in distance learning and isolated. And Skyview was struggling across the board coming out of COVID to have a school where everyone felt safe, where everyone felt valued in the community, where everyone felt like they needed to come to school. Uh, there was a term that would fit here used on an earlier slide. There was a lot of high risk behaviors taking place here by students. Not just your typical someone talking back to a teacher or something like that, really unsafe things. And so we felt like um, we don't have all the answers here right now to find our way through this. And just so happened to be developing a partnership with Search Institute at that time to do some implementation of the developmental relationship framework. And it really gave us some common language to use, regardless of what teachers viewed as their strengths or what principals viewed as their strengths for that matter, for how are we going to talk about at Skyview Middle School what it means to develop a relationship with a student. Let's surface what that will actually look like and all agree about that so we can name it in our classroom. How do we translate this language for students? But it really grew out of an understanding of we were not in a healthy or safe place as a Skyview community at that time, and we needed support to be able to move forward.
Yeah, that shared language, shared understanding. There's something powerful when you start to talk about it in a way that clicks. How about you, Patrice?
I would say at the community level, when we're working with our students, we do a lot of these things and we don't realize that we're doing it. So I think that was the biggest buy-in is that you are actually doing it, but we don't name it. We don't think about what this is called and we don't think about the examples of how we're implementing it. But when we got together, we got to talk about like, hey, I had this situation with this student and this is how, we work through it and what element does this fall under. I think that kind of allowed people to think like, oh, okay, like actually, this is not far-fetched. This is something I'm actually doing, but I just haven't named or haven't recognized within myself. But then it also makes you more aware so that you are doing it more and more. And you're also able to point out the areas in which you're not doing or not doing as much of, which I could see the comments coming in about like, oh, I'm stronger in this one and not in this one. And yeah, you
Yeah.
start to realize it. And now it's like, okay, I'm going to challenge myself to tap into this certain element that I have not been utilizing.
Yeah. I do this with, I have two kids. I have an 11 and 8-year-old, and the framework for me it almost opens a door of like us being able to, like me saying, well, what can I get better at? Which one of these, what is my son in each of them are different need in this moment from me? And I think but it also can encourage us that like the things we care about and that we're doing matter. And I love how you name that, Patrice, because I think that's another thing that's really cool is like when we go into organizations, there are so many great things they're doing already with with the five elements. So thank you both.
I want to build on that a little bit. Patrice, you started by saying that with your colleagues, sometimes you're like, we're doing these things already. We just needed the language for them. And also now we can attune to some of them that we need to be doing more than others. Um, and I think we see that shows up. So you're in a community-based youth program, and we see that young people who are filling out surveys who are in youth programs are often saying that they're experiencing most of these elements. And it looks a little bit different in schools, where I wonder if, Jeff, you would say that your staff are saying, oh, we're doing these things already, we just need the language for them, or if it feels a little bit different. So I kind of want to talk about, how the context that you're in help to facilitate, strong relationships and how you work against some of the structures that might make it harder to build relationships there. Um, Patrice, why don't you start there and then Jeff will shift to you.
I would say for us, because some of our services are in schools for like maybe like a period or so, but I feel like our setting, we're able to do it easier because we don't have students all day. I feel like there's like a different dynamic in the schools to where they have like different metrics they have to meet and so on. So we're able to hone in and really focus on developing those relationships with our students. Um, but yeah, I feel like we were able to practice it a lot more because our interactions with the students are a little more lax and there's less pressure. Um, like I hope that makes sense. Like it's kind of like, okay, you've had a tough day at school, come down to Good Sam. Like, you know what I mean? So it's like it's a different dynamic here for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, two things here. First of all, to Ben's earlier point about the perception gap between students and adults, or children and adults. I have a 14-year-old son. He's actually an eighth grader here at the school that I'm the principal of. I can tell you there is a perception gap between me and him at times as far as how I'm expressing care and challenging growth. So we know there will always be some version of that in place. But I do think the intentionality of adults using this language to explain their actions and expectations to students goes a long way towards taking that on. This was our fourth year of giving the survey, the developmental relationship survey. It was our first year where we did see that gap narrow. And I think some of that speaks to students who were in a building for 3 years, our eighth grade cohort, hearing that language an increasing amount throughout. As far as the buy-in piece, there is some amount of this that it could be a leader could identify it as exactly the right tool, but how do you get your staff on board? And particularly, I've only ever worked in an education setting, so I don't know what staff development looks like at other sites, but it can be challenging for teachers to hear from someone who's not having their exact experience any longer as a classroom teacher. And I do think it's important to be able to find ways to validate with any adult learner, you already are exhibiting this to some degree, but here's some outcomes that we're getting currently that all of us agree aren't acceptable and that we want to do better. And then build from there. But thinking through the professional development and the introduction of this as a tool, I think deserves a lot of care and a lot of insight from stakeholders before taking that step and rolling it out.
Yeah, if we stay in the context a little bit too, I wonder, just speaking a little bit about the challenges. What are some of the challenges within your particular context that you're seeing? Um, it could be challenges that are sometimes make it difficult to make progress in the strengthening the development relationships. And it may even be some challenges that you're seeing with some of the young people. And we're going to flip that and talk about what are the strengths that are also that you're seeing and some of the things that are emerging in your context. But I would love to just have an honest conversation about what are some of the challenges that you all are facing right now as leaders in these different contexts.
I would say some of the challenges are our students are going through so much, right? And then by the time they get to us, they have like this distrust of adults, basically. So you're trying to like break down walls with students and build relationships, but you don't know what they've faced by the time they've gotten to you. So you don't know what their home life is like. You don't know how their teachers are treating them at school. But then you have this 3 hours after school to where you have to kind of like, be consistent with them to let them know, like, hey, this is a safe space. I want to build this relationship with you. So I feel like that's a challenge because, yeah, it's like, okay, I'm a good adult in this student's life, but they've seen so many other adults that are not as good, that have not gone through this training, who work in a school setting, but aren't there mentally, aren't there in their hearts. So that's definitely a challenge. But I would say a strength. Our students are very resilient, and that's wonderful to see. Um, they have big voices, they have big personalities, they're leaders. And I think just something we have to work on is helping them use their leadership skills in a good way, a positive way, and I think most people can see that in students. They're like super funny and outgoing, but they're the class clown. And it's like, how can we shape the student into using their leadership skills for good and so on.
One, I think if you probably all noticed, like, and I'm sure it happened, but the smile on your face when you started to shift to like talking about the strengths, and like I could feel it across the screen of like you thinking about young people, and I'll just ask that to the audience too. What are some strengths within your context to put into the chat of the young people that you serve? And the other thing I think I want to comment on and then come over to you, Jeff, is like when we think about relationships, um, there's also a lot of relational wounds. Because if you think about the developmental needs from the time we're born into this world, we are asking some innate questions, and the two are that are really strong is, am I worthy? Am I of value? And am I safe? And when those are kind of violated, and really those are answered through love and relationship and trustworthiness and showing up. When there's violations there, there's relational wounds that kids bring into that shape the way they see the world. And the beauty is, as I hear you talk and think about this, is that relational wounds require relational healing. And when there is that corrective kind of relational experience, we start to tap into what those strengths are. But it takes, I'd love, I think I want to spend some time on this in both contexts. Is like, how do you make sure that fundamental kind of need of safety and worthiness is established before you start to even move into those other parts of the kind of DR framework around expanding possibilities, sharing power, these kinds of things too. Because I hear that in what you said too, Patrice. So I really appreciate that. Jeff, what about you? What's in your context? What are some challenges and strengths and things that you're seeing?
Yeah, I do think that adolescents especially are showing up to their school day carrying a whole lot more than might have been true in the past, because some of the concerns that used to only occur when I was in school and it only happened when you were face to face with someone now can extend past the school day. And
Hmm.
there are online conversations happening and social media conversations happening late into the evening that cause fear, cause hurt feelings, cause anger. And we spend a lot of time unwinding that at school, which we have to do because the student is not in a position to learn anything or make a positive connection with anyone. But we do spend a lot of time unwinding that here. Someone also in the comments mentioned the need to be able to partner with parents. I think, especially at the elementary and middle level, that's so key. And
Yeah.
we have as broad a range as you can imagine of parent perceptions of school, of those that are all in and right there with us, those that are very skeptical because of their own school experience not being a positive one. And we're trying to overcome that so that we can support their student better. And parents that are new to the country and didn't have the same educational experience and aren't even sure if they're allowed to ask questions or come to school, or any of those things. And so I do think that that is a challenge for sure. How do we target our relationships with families so that they're getting what they need so their student is more likely to buy in? As far as strengths, I spent my whole career at the high school level before coming to Skyview. And I'm just amazed at Patrice used resilience. I think that word works, but also just the adaptability of middle school students to an administrator or teacher saying, here's what I've identified as an issue. So we're going to change up how we do this thing. We're going to teach you how to do it. At the high school level, they're pretty set in their ways, and that is difficult to take on. But our middle schools are really adaptable and really willing to dive into new routines, new ways of doing things if they feel like it's being presented to them by a caring adult and they can understand why it's in their best interest. Um, and then a stereotype that I'd always heard that is definitely true is they're much more willing to share with you exactly how they're feeling about any given situation. High schoolers tended to be a bit more buttoned down by that point. And so I do find that helpful to be able to understand exactly what's bothering them. They tend to be much more open about that when you're discussing them. So their adaptability, their versatility, their openness about their feelings, I do think made implementing this framework much more possible at Skyview.
That's really exciting to hear about, especially at the middle grades level, where sometimes, in my experience, the unevenness and the challenges tend to override what you see as strengths. But I love the way that you're reframing, like the questions and the curiosity and the interest in things that are new and the wanting to explore and discover is all part of what's happening during this time. And so you're now able to kind of think about that as how might we learn from the young people that are in our spaces. I want to build on that a little bit. And for this next question, maybe start with you, Jeff. So, as you've shared, you've been engaging now for a few years with developmental relationships across Skyview. Tell us a little bit about, how your organizational context or climate has shifted and other things you've seen. So you've mentioned that perceptions between students and staff are starting to narrow a little bit more. Staff have some new language that they're using. What else has shifted since you've engaged in this work?
We were talking about buy-in earlier and those initial challenges with getting staff to buy into what might feel like another new initiative. And so we knew we were going to need to be able to demonstrate whether or not it's working. And so data has been a significant part of this. We were fortunate to be able to partner directly with Search Institute for a couple of years there to generate some of that data. But we've just seen really exciting growth. Over the last 2 years, our out of school suspensions have been reduced by 2/3. we have a form that teachers can fill out to request someone else to come and support a student's behavior. Those have been reduced by a third over the last year. And we've seen our achievement grow these last 3 consecutive years now on the standardized tests that the state of Minnesota gives to students. And so we were able to point directly to, we all agreed to talk about relationships with students in this way, to implement it in this way. And we're seeing results. And teachers are experiencing that even without the numbers in front of them in their classroom. And so continuing the work because of the results that they're seeing. It's also changed how we think about student behavior, or at least started to. The behavior focus at Skyview for a long time was identify the bad behaviors and punish them. And sometimes that is what you have to do for sure. But we weren't really focusing on the assets, on the good things that were happening. And so through our work with Search Institute, we developed a reward system for students. We talk about, adults can catch students doing something good, and they can write them what we call a CARES ticket. And then it goes into a drawing, and we read students' names off each week, and they get a little bag of school supplies and treats. And it's become kind of a big thing. And we've got these glass boxes in the media center where they can put their blue ticket in there. Different students come down and help do the drawing. And so a relatively small thing, but every week we're naming positive behaviors that are taking place, and teachers are doing it each day in their classroom. So it's not exclusively a focus on what not to do, as an example of a school-wide culture shift. And then the last thing I'll say quickly, it has impacted the adult culture in our organization. It has shifted people from being hung up on the bad things that are happening around them, and sort of their perception of their job is based on that. And we're talking to each other differently now about all topics, whether it's about student behavior or achievement or not. So this work did impact the adult community as well.
That's really awesome to hear. When I think about the example you shared about students and noticing, good behaviors and calling those out and rewarding those, in order to do that, you have to know your students pretty well. So really focusing on relationships as a way to understand what might be different, how students are showing up differently is a foundation. And we hear this from some of our other partners as well, that this framework allows them too, to think about their own relationships with one another in the broader relational context. Patrice, how about you? How has, sort of engagement across Good Sam with developmental relationships changed some of the work that you do?
I would say not so much of a change, I would say enhancement. Because like I said, there's things that we have already been doing, excelling at, but being able to name it is making us more aware of the areas in which we can improve. Um, and I feel like it also had a lot to do with empowering staff to do some of the things. And for example, I would say like even for myself, because of my position with Good Sam, like I don't have an after school class. I'm more like support, behavioral support in some cases. So sometimes I would shy away from like talking to students that I wasn't familiar with. But now I'm like, hey, like if I see a student, I'm like, hey, welcome to Good Sam. Like, how are you? Like, how was your day? But it took a while for me to feel like, oh, like I can talk to this kid. Like, I feel like a kid myself. Like, I can't, like, I'm all shy. I can't talk to the student. But just feeling empowered to like, no, like you are the adult, and like it's up to you to initiate this relationship, um, and utilize the skills that you're learning, and not be shy to just initiate that interaction with the student that you're unfamiliar with, because they also feel the same way. They're probably like, who is this adult? Who is this person? But through consistency, then you start to recognize the student. You know their name. They know your name. So yeah, just simple things like that. And like Mr. Jeff mentioned, yeah, sometimes we are focusing on negative behaviors. And I feel like it has helped kind of like shift like the why and focusing on those good qualities of the students. Like I mentioned, we have some students that have big personalities, and other students follow after, and kind of just learning like, okay, like, yeah, this is a strength that the student has. Let's not harp on the negative. Let's actually grow this skill within the student, and let them know like, hey, we see you. We're here. Like, you don't have to act out. Like we can work together to like make this a better experience for you.
Thanks, Patrice. Your reflecting on your own kind of moving out of your comfort zone speaks to as well, like you're now contributing to the overall climate of the program that and the space that young people are stepping into. So it's not necessarily just the adults that they have, closer relationships with. It's like all of the staff who are in this space are here to welcome me and to see and connect with me. Thank you each for sharing. We have several questions from our very engaged audience, and we want to shift over to those. So, Ben, do you want to pick a question from our audience
Yeah.
list and
Yeah, there's so many good ones. We'll see how many we can get through, and some of the themes that have been talked about have kind of come up. But one of them I think is interesting is this consistent finding we've had for several years now around the kind of lower scores on reports of expanding possibilities and thinking about, exposing young people to resources, opportunities, experiences outside of what they know and see. Um, I wondered if either one of you would they're asking a little bit about why this might be, but also what are some of the challenges for expanding possibilities, and then maybe what are some things you all are doing to expand possibilities of your students and youth right now.
I would say one thing we do here at Good Sam is by bringing other professionals in to speak to students. I think that's the main one that's most feasible. In a perfect world, we would love to take them on field trips to different career sites. We do college tours, but we do want to hone in on different career sites. But just bringing people in to talk and share experiences, I think has expanded their, basically like empowering them to know like, hey, there are other options. Like usually certain things are pushed on students and they don't know about certain careers. So having our marketing person come in and talk about how she uses social media, the students were like really stoked. And she was from Good Sam. It wasn't even like an outside person, but it's like, oh, okay, like here, this person actually works here, but you don't even see them because they're behind the scenes. So just kind of like being creative. Sometimes you have to be creative, especially in the community services aspect where you may not have the funding to do all that you want to do. So I would say I would definitely recommend like just exposing them to different professionals or yeah, different professionals for sure.
I love that idea of like being creative and the lived experience it's already there, right? Like we all have kind of an experience or possibilities or things in our lives that we sometimes take for granted, and just exposing young people to that to say, oh, that is a possibility. I didn't know that was a possibility. I didn't know and I love that the idea of really those small things. What about you, Jeff?
Well, that's so interesting that Patrice said that because one diagnosis I have, at least of this middle school that I work at, is we've just become very isolated from the community. And we're doing really good work here. Students feel safe and connected to each other here, but we're sort of our own entity from, 7:15 to 2 when they're here each day. And I think getting our doors open, getting community members in here, getting them up in front of students, whether it's career speakers or just folks sharing their experiences or folks who have businesses or organizations here in the community, um, I think would be a key next step in students seeing that this isn't just where I'm required to be during this time. This can get me ready to go do this thing that this parent just shared with me or this person just shared with me. So I think between COVID, between safety concerns, there's a lot of good reasons that has happened to schools. And I think figuring out safe and appropriate ways to get the doors open while students are here and school is in session would be helpful in taking on that gap.
Thanks. I think then that speaks to opportunities as well. Like you said, opening the doors, thinking about families too, and the strengths and assets and skills that they can bring to our communities is another way to think about resources. I'm gonna maybe pull in one more question. This is also about, so that was about expanding possibilities. There's an attendee who asked about sharing power with young people. There's a longer piece of the question, but I'm going to get to that. And Jeff, I want to start with you. In my previous experience, I was training pre-service teachers, and we would always talk about adolescents and their capacities and their strengths. But this idea that, like, maybe my classroom, I have control over it, and what does it feel like to kind of share power a little bit? So I wonder how your staff have also kind of dealt with and kind of engaged in how they think about sharing power in schools.
Yeah, so that's our second lowest perception score from students is sharing power. And I do think the language of the framework, though, is helpful in teachers understanding exactly what that could mean. Because I do think there's a tendency to go to the extreme of how can I, the adult, not be responsible for everything that's happening in here. So if the language of the framework, respect me, include me, collaborate, and let me lead. Take me seriously, involve me in decisions that affect me. I think that makes way more sense to middle school teachers as an entry point, as opposed to some of the concerns they might have had about what that would imply of students influencing, how some amount of content is being delivered. And so we just so happened to be in a remodeled school that removed lockers and introduced all sorts of flex spaces around the building. And my first year here, I actually went on a tour with Search Institute folks, and the flex spaces were empty, and all the students were in the classrooms, in their desks. And so the framework provided us a tool of what that could look like. We have these spaces, we have these small group rooms. You can introduce choice to students and how they might engage in an activity. You can choose to stay in the classroom with me. You can choose to work in this area. You can choose to work over here. And then they can create with you the expectations for how they'll conduct themselves in those spaces. And then it's something we've all agreed to now. And so this Skyview Cares framework that we developed that I referenced earlier with the tickets and the rewards, that was really how we gave student voice to the developmental relationship framework. What is language that you all will recognize, or what are actions that we'll take that you all will recognize means we're trying to support you and care about you and help you grow. And then we'll create those expectations together. But like I said, it is our second lowest perception, so I don't want to claim that we're there. But those have been the initial steps that we've taken.
Thank you. Patrice, what does it look like for you?
It is actually our lowest one here at Good Sam. And we were so like shocked, like, what? Like they don't think that we share power. Surely we gave them an option at one time, or like, you know what I mean? So I would say what I think would help us best was being more consistent and making sure that they are recognizing those opportunities because yeah, we're like, yeah, a time or two, we've definitely given them options, but it's like, how can we help them recognize that this is what we're doing and that we're being intentional when we give them these options? Because we're like, we know we're doing it. There's just some disconnect. Maybe they don't remember. But I think if you do anything consistently, people are going to pick up on it. Students are going to pick up and learn and like using a specific language so that they can draw the connection. And I think that's the biggest thing. Like what we took from it after seeing those results. So, but it looks like we're all kind of like in the same boat, and it could be the language used and just not being on the same page when it is happening. Because I doubt that we're it's not happening at all. I think it's just, just some type of disconnect.
If
Yeah,
I
and
can add
it's,
one
oh yeah,
more,
sure.
so sorry, just super quick. I do think part of it also is when something goes wrong and we retract what we agreed to with the students, we're no longer sharing power. Now I'm back in charge because this happened. I think that makes way more of an impression on students than the initial offer to share power. And so to Patrice's point about consistency, you've got to really work hard to build that back up again once you withdrew it, even if it was for a totally legitimate reason.
Yeah. Yeah.
Someone
And
in the
then
comments said to let the students choose the options too. Yes, that I agree. I send all
Yes.
of them.
I was thinking that as well. I'm going to share my gratitude with each of you for being here today to share what this looks like in practice. You're really bringing developmental relationships to life, breathing life into the framework in ways that I think helps each of us understand it at a deeper level. I feel like you set up the kind of take home points that I just want to share briefly. So I'm going to pull the slide deck back up. I think, Patrice, to the point you were making, perception matters. So if young people, like you think you're doing something, but they're like, we're not really sure. We're not really seeing it the same way. So understanding ways to listen deeply to youth becomes really critical and really important. We also know that to move from kind of happy coincidences, like, oh, look, something is working out, to a true relational ecosystem, as adults, we need to be intentional and inclusive and equitable. This intentionality helps turn these kind of one-off or isolated moments into really rich climates that foster long-term thriving and belonging for youth. And ultimately, we want to continue building towards a world that Ben described when we at the beginning of our session today. This is where all young people experience the strong relationships and opportunities that support their learning, their growth, their contribution, and their thriving. When we are knowing the inherent value of each young person, when we're nurturing it and activating it, youth and communities are thriving together. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks to our audience. As you're saying goodbye, please share any other key takeaways you have in the chat. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here and for your participation.